Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here on day 2 of Whitley Bay. It's such a pleasure to be here, and such a pleasure to bring you the music of Jimmy Joy. Jimmy Joy, or Jimmy Maloney, started a group at the University of Texas in Austin, which is my hometown, so it's really great to play that music. I also am an alum of the University of Texas Law School, so I got to see all the different venues and places that Jimmy Joy played there. He led a really wonderful little college band, started there around 1922. Jimmy was born Jimmy Maloney in the town of Mount Vernon, Texas, which is in northeast Texas, kind of near where Arkansas and Oklahoma and Texas meet, like in that kind of corner of the state. And he originally enrolled in Texas A&M University, which is our rival school. Thankfully, he saw the light and went to the University of Texas. He transferred after a semester. Started a group called the Texas Jazzers, incredible name, but not as incredible as Jimmy Joy, which was a name they took on after they got a gig at the Joyland Park in Galveston, Texas, on the coast, the Gulf Coast of Texas, near kind of Houston and that area. So they took on the name Jimmie's JOYS. And Jimmy eventually became known as Jimmy Joy, and then he legally changed his name to Jimmy Joy, so he became Jimmy Joy. The group was the most popular one on campus. That's not just what members of the band said, that there's tons of testimony from students saying that they loved that band. They played all the different social clubs and dances, and they quickly became the most popular jazz band in the state. They had some rivals, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But they were very popular. Their reputation soon spread throughout the South and even across the border into Mexico. They played a gig for the president of Mexico, like a command performance, which was, they all talked about kind of being scared doing that, but it went well. And after the Joyland show, they went on a tour around the United States, ending up in New York City, where they almost got a contract for Brunswick Records. They may have done a trial. We don't really know the information, but I'm assuming if they did, it didn't go too well, because there's no records from that. Returning to campus, they had a little swap of the cornet players. They had this guy, Walter Holzhaus, who Mike Davis did a fantastic interpretation of yesterday on Andrew Oliver's Willard Robeson set. So Holzhaus left and joined Louis Forbstein in Kansas City, and then Willard after that. And Rex Prius, a New Orleanian cornet player, joined. He was also a student at the university. He joined Jimmie's JOYS. And then during their, I believe, winter break in 1923, they toured west and went to Los Angeles, where they played all along the West Coast. I mean, it's hard to imagine now, touring around the country as college kids with the amount of work that college students have. I guess in the 20s, without social media and other distractions, it was a little bit easier. But while in Los Angeles, they met up with this really eccentric fellow by the name of Theophilus Fitz, who built a recording studio in his living room. The studio was called Golden Records, and it existed for about 2 years. And they would send the wax discs cut in the living room to the East Coast to be pressed and brought back. So Jimmie's JOYS, while on tour in LA in 1923, made their first records, and their first recording was the one we just played, Sobbin' Blues. So this next one is from that same session. It's a tune called Bugle Call Rag. It's very much in the style of the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. I mean, it's their tune. And they were very influenced by the Nork. There's a little quote from the University of Texas fight song, The Eyes of Texas. So see if you notice it. Lars? So I realized I haven't actually mentioned the instrument that Jimmy Joy played, and we're very fortunate enough to have somebody who can do all of the things that Jimmy Joy did musically, which we were going to kind of see the limit of in this next tune. Jimmy Joy was a reed player, primarily clarinetist, in what is known as the gas pipe style. Now, gas pipe clarinet was a novelty style of clarinet, Ted Lewis being the most famous exponent of gas pipe. That doesn't sound very good, does it? And there were many others, you know, Bob Fuller, Charlie Fulcher, the list goes on and on. Jack Links, it's another good territory band, gas pipe clarinet player. But Jimmy Joy was one of the kind of most tasteful of the gas pipe clarinet players. So, you know, he played, you know, in this kind of novelty style, but he still had a really good understanding of the blues and of just how to play kind of hot and really in a tasteful way. Most of the time. However, he also was very much one to lean into the novelty, and he had a signature trick that he would do, so much so that in both the photo of the band in the Golden Studio and several photos taken on campus, he would show off this trick. So I'm not going to tell you what it is, but you'll see very soon on his sort of signature tune, the St. Louis Blues. McQuaid, everyone. You know, the phrase "that hasn't been done in 100 years" gets thrown around a lot, over the weekend, but I guarantee you that has not been done since the days of Jimmy Joy. When we were figuring out how to do this, I asked Michael, do you want me to write your part, harmonized on one line, or do you want two lines? And he went for one line. So, another round of applause for this guy. That was not easy.
I just want to say, I'm not showboating by standing up and pointing like that. It's the only way you can use gravity to keep them from falling out.
Well, as you can see, the band has now grown. So in 1924, after the release of the Golden Records, which, by the way, they only pressed about 200 or so copies of each one. They're extremely rare. I own one of them, and I found it in San Antonio, Texas, so that should tell you, the distribution of those was very limited. But the band grew after the return from their tour to the West Coast to an 8-piece band, very much influenced by the recordings, as I said, of the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, and soon as well the Wolverines. They were very cued into the popular styles of the day. And back in 1923, the New Orleans Rhythm Kings revived an original Dixieland jazz band tune, Clarinet Marmalade. And so when the Jimmy Joy band graduated, they got a gig at the St. Anthony Hotel in San Antonio, and the kind of stuff that they were playing was really like the New Orleans Rhythm Kings kind of brand of jazz, including Clarinet Marmalade. So when they got an offer in the middle of the year for the OK Company to record, because they were coming down to Dallas to do their first session in Texas, one of the tunes they chose was the Clarinet Marmalade Blues. So here is the Jimmy Joy interpretation of Clarinet Marmalade. Another tune that the Jimmy Joy Band recorded at their second session, their first for the OK label, was a tune written by a Memphis composer by the name of Bob Müller, which has many different names. Mama Will Be Gone, Papa's Gone, Papa Will Be Gone, Someday Your Mama Will Be Gone. You know, I don't know. But what I do know is that that tune was a huge hit in Texas for some reason. I would gather it's got kind of almost like a honky-tonk kind of beat and a honky-tonk kind of melody, which really characterizes the jazz of Texas from that time. I mean, you have your ballrooms in San Antonio and Dallas and places like that, but the majority of the gigs that people were playing down there would have been dances in kind of roadhouses and places like that around the state. And, you know, the music in Texas, the jazz music of the jazz age, a lot of it developed into Western swing next. So you have the roots of that kind of permeating into a lot of the jazz. You know, you have the influence of New Orleans and Chicago and records and things, but you also have a little bit of that country thing. So I think certain tunes really fit that style really well, and this is one of them. So the Jimmy Joy Band recorded it as Mama Will Be Gone. Now, what's interesting is about 6 years later, another University of Texas band led by a guy named Fred Gardner recorded this as well under the name Papa's Gone. And my band back in Austin, Texas, the Joy Makers, which, yes, it is a nod to Jimmy Joy, we played Papa's Gone on our first album, and we were performing on the radio, kind of promoting the record. And after the show, the DJ said, "Oh, we got a phone call from the granddaughter of Fred Gardner, you know, saying, 'Oh, thank you so much for playing my grandfather's music and all this stuff. And by the way, I'm really good friends with Jimmy Joy's granddaughter.'" So, full circle. Austin is not that big of a city. Anyway, here is Mama Will Be Gone. Thanks so much, y'all. This is way too much fun. So the Jimmy Joy Band, as I mentioned, they played a long residency at the St. Anthony Hotel in San Antonio, and my good friend Chris Alvarado leads a group, the Dirty River Jazz Band. Not the Deep River Jazz Band, the Dirty River Jazz Band. So many river jazz bands in Texas, I don't know. And they play quite frequently at the St. Anthony. They had a standing gig for a long time there and still, play a lot of dances and things. And when Mike was visiting me in Austin, we actually got a chance to sit in with them and do a fun little show there. And while we were on break, we snuck into the ballroom where they used to play, and we got to listen to Mama Will Be Gone in there, which was really cool, being in that space. It's still a ballroom. I've played dances there during Christmas time and everything. It still looks like the 20s. It's really cool. So after that residency, and after graduating, yes, they did all somehow manage to graduate while recording for 2 record labels and touring around the country. Again, no social media really will do wonders. They continued to tour around, and they booked with the MCA agency, which was a major touring and booking agency around the country, especially for territory bands. That brought them up to Dallas and various other places. And then in the spring of 1925, they ended up in Kansas City, Missouri. And they had a long-standing residency at the Muehlebach Hotel, because the resident band there, the Coon Sanders Nighthawks, were, I think, in Chicago at the time. So there was an opening for a band, and the Jimmy Joy Band was playing there at the Grill in the hotel, broadcasting over WDAF and checking out the local acts, including Benny Moten's orchestra. There's some interviews with the guys where they talk about going to hear the Moten Band and being very into that group. And when OK came to Kansas City to record, they recorded the Joy Band right there in the Muehlebach, in the basement where the WDAF studios were in the hotel. And so even though the Joy Band had just done a session in Dallas, they did another one in Kansas City, and it's a little bit different than the Dallas session. The Dallas one focuses on really kind of hot out-and-out playing, but the Kansas City session, I mean, they're still hot out-and-out playing, but there's a lot more kind of arranged passages and more complex things. I'm assuming that probably has to do with the music they were playing on the gig, playing for a hotel dancing audience, but also OK would often suggest tunes to record, and maybe after their first session, OK said, all right, we know you can play hot, but can you play these pop tunes that'll sell records? So this next one is the first tune that they recorded on that session. It's a nice tune that I know Louis Armstrong recorded with Fletcher Henderson, and a few other people recorded as well, called Memphis Bound. One, two, three. So, as you can see, it's a slightly different texture from the just out-and-out hot playing, but it's still hot in its own kind of simmering way, and sometimes that's more fun to play than just out-and-out hot. I really like their interpretation there. How about that wonderful trombone solo from T.J. Müller? And that very active reed section there with Mike and Lars, really wonderful. So this next tune that they recorded was one that was cut by a couple of different territory bands, and I have a theory. The Joy Band kind of teamed up with the Whiteman booking agency around this time as well, Paul Whiteman's booking agency, as did Anthony Parenti, clarinet player based out of New Orleans. And I've heard that with many of these booking agencies, they would recommend or even send stock arrangements to play the popular tunes or tunes that, you know, they might have had some business deal with the publisher. I'm not sure. That's conjecture, I should say. But one of the tunes that the Parenti Band and the Joy Band both recorded, and both using the same stock arrangement and both kind of in the same style, is a tune called Be Yourself. And this one goes out to my good friend Henry Parsons. I know he really digs this one, and I do too. So here is their Kansas City recording of Be Yourself. Once again, way too much fun up here. So, I should talk a little bit more kind of about the scene in Texas during this time, just because it's a very overlooked scene, but it was an important one, and it deserves a little bit of context. And being from there, I think I've been able to kind of understand that a little bit more than some really, hardworking historians, but ones who've never been there. So, Texas sits in a very kind of central location in North America. You have a bunch of different cultures meeting all at once. You have the Deep South and what's going on there. You have the Midwest and the Great Plains. You have the West, what's going on in the Rocky Mountains and out there. And the thing that a lot of people forget is Mexico, right down under there too. So the influence of all of those different sounds and cultures culminate into Texas music. And even when it's not recognized by Texans, it culminates into Texas music. So you have all sorts of different people and scenes going on at once. And the other thing is the city of San Antonio in particular is a very important one. It's one of the oldest cities in North America. I mean, there's buildings from the 1700s, which to y'all probably sounds like they were built yesterday. But in the United States, 1700s and 1600s is ancient history. And so with that history, it was a much more developed and culturally significant place. And so when the Joy Band came there and became very popular, they represented a lot of that sound. And a lot of the members of the band also came from different parts of Texas and the Deep South and places like that. Like the cornet player, Rex Prius, I was doing a little bit of cramming before the set, just learning about these musicians. And he was born in New Orleans, and then at the age of 5, moved to Houston, and then at the age of 10, moved back to New Orleans, where he learned how to play the cornet, and then was sent to boarding school in Fort Worth, which is near Dallas, where he really learned how to play the cornet, and then enrolled at the University of Texas in Austin. So, pinballing all around there. And that was not uncommon back then for musicians. So you had the rise of a lot of really distinct sounds and styles of music in that scene. And one of the most influential ones was the piano style, sort of this rollicking kind of barrel house style that incorporated ragtime and blues. And it traveled often via the railroad. The train line between New Orleans, the Texas and New Orleans Railroad, which was part of the Southern Pacific, which went all the way from New Orleans to LA, went right through San Antonio and Houston. So you had a lot of musicians coming and going through that kind of channel. You also had the Texas and Pacific from Dallas all the way to El Paso, and a lot of musicians would take that route and then go down into Mexico to play, Jack Teagarden among them. I'm sure many of you have seen that photo of Jack Teagarden in the mid-20s, very young Jack Teagarden, kind of looking very stern. That was taken in Mexico City. And also the Katy Railroad, which was the one that went up to Kansas City. And bringing that piano style around, you had a lot of professors of the piano who were very influential, among them a piano player by the name of Phil Baxter, who wrote many great tunes, including the masterpiece that is known as I'm a Ding Dong Daddy from Dumas. But he wrote many other tunes too, Harmonica Harry, Piccolo Pete, lots of other silly titles, as well as not so silly titles. And he wrote one tune in the early 20s that the Joy Band took on as their theme song. Not the Jimmy Joy theme song, that was St. Louis Blues, but the band theme song, which is a tune called Wild Jazz. And finally, in 1925 in Kansas City, they were able to record it. So here is Wild Jazz. Yeah. All right. That was Wild Jazz. Shout out to Michael McQuaid there for playing that wonderful melody at the top. I can imagine in some rural towns, across Texas and Oklahoma and places like that where they'd only heard, the occasional phonograph record in the, the drugstore or wherever of a jazz band. Hearing that band coming into town and playing that tune must have really been something, in like 1922 or 23. And I love the fact that Phil Baxter, who later led his own really popular band called the Texas Tommies, was swapping charts and swapping arrangements with Texas bands and things like that. There was definitely some camaraderie going on. Now, the Jimmy Joy Band, after their trip to Kansas City, had a little bit of off time before going back to Texas. And so they decided they wanted to hear some more of their heroes. They got to hear Benny Moten, they got to hear Louis Forbestein and these other great bands in Kansas City. But they had a little time, so they said, we're such big fans of this group, the Wolverine Orchestra, that we've been hearing about in Chicago, and their cornet player, Bix Beiderbecke. And they heard that Bix, having recently been let go from Gene Goldkett, or I guess kind of put on leave, was in Chicago playing with Charlie Davis. And so they thought, we're going to go to Chicago and we're going to hang out with Bix and maybe we're going to even cut a record. And so they took the train across and over up to Chicago and they met Bix playing, I think actually at the Green Mill. I don't know if Andy is here, but the Davis Band was playing at the Green Mill, which were called the Green Mill Gardens in that day. And they got to play with Bix and hang out with him. But then they partied a little bit too hard that night, and the record didn't happen. And man, that would have been a great record. They were planning, I think, to make it for Autograph, so would have been really, really cool. So after that failed attempt, they traveled back down to Texas, where they went to the town of LaPorte down on the coast, and they were playing there opposite the band of Peck Kelly. And I'll talk a little bit more about that after this next tune, but they were playing in Houston and also playing in Dallas at the Baker Hotel, which is a very popular hotel. Now, I mentioned the camaraderie of Texas bands, but as is customary in almost any scene, there were also rivals. And Jimmy Joy's biggest rival is kind of strangely my favorite Texas band, which is the Jack Gardner Orchestra of Dallas. And they played at the Adolphus Hotel, which was across the street from the Baker Hotel. And the rival was so petty that when Jack Gardner got an accordion, Jimmy Joy said, "Oh, we gotta get an accordion player." And they got an accordion player. And it was like dueling accordion. It was just ridiculous. But they both had contracts for OK. They were both very popular among the dancing crowd. The main difference was that the Joy Band really focused on the heat, playing really hot tunes, even with this more arranged style. And the Gardner Band really stuck to the kind of commercial arrangements. They could get hot too, but it was a very different kind of approach. I like them because they're a little bit strange. They're kind of unique. But the Jimmy Joy Band, for those who are really into the hot bands and the New Orleans Rhythm Kings and stuff, is a little more palatable, I think. So when they were at the Baker Hotel, the OK Company came again to Dallas, and they did their last session for OK there in, I believe, the fall of 1925, so a few months after the previous one. And here is perhaps the most commercial, but one of the most fun numbers that they recorded. Many other groups, like the Miami Lucky Seven, also did this one. It's called Fallin' Down. All right, y'all. Well, we got time for just one more. This has been such a fun set. I just love this stuff. You know, I get to play this with my band back home, but it's also really fun to play with these all-stars.
Excuse me, sorry.
So I'll keep this quick here. This last tune they did, I think it was the last record they made for OK. It was written by another great Texas barrelhouse piano player, one of legendary status, who hired, among others, the great Jack Teagarden and Pee Wee Russell. That's Peck Kelly. And, you know, once again, connecting to that whole Bix thing, Kelly, at some point around, kind of around when this record was made, was actually up in St. Louis playing in a little group with Bix and Teagarden and people like that at the Arcadia Ballroom, which, you know, we did that set last night. So anyway, this is a tune that Peck Kelly wrote that later Teagarden and a few others took on. You may know it as I'm Gonna Stomp Mr. Henry Lee, but it was originally recorded by Jimmie's JOYS as Stomp It Mr. Kelly.